Chapter 10. Rarefied Mirth. The Seattle Tourism Commission has asked me to say a few words to the local media before the performance on the roof. But I'm having trouble making out the reporters' faces between the blinding strobe of the flashbulbs. You'd think I'd be used to 'em by now, but they still give me a headache. First up is a fella named Dory. Says he works at Cairo. Asks me if I'm shocked or upset about the decline of the city and how it's turned into a giant trash heap since I've been away. I tell him he's gotta have a screw loose. First of all, I know a thing or two about living in a trash heap, and this city is no trash heap. And by the way, you know who did live in a trash heap and never complained about it? Just J.P. Patches, that's all. Star of the longest-running locally produced clown show in America. On Cairo, of all stations. And you dishonor your corporate media legacy to disparage this place by using trash heap as an insult. When I was a kid, I was scared to come into this city. You know why? Because back then, there was a very real possibility that a young boy could get snatched right up off the sidewalk by a seafarer pirate. I saw it happen to others, and came damn close to getting abducted myself. But I haven't seen a single seafarer pirate since I've been back, so I guess Phoenix Jones and his crew are doing a pretty good job of keeping things on the up and up. You know what I have seen since I came back? An unparalleled dedication to the comedic arts. That's what. If you look down from these massive plate glass windows, you'll see tents. Thousands and thousands of tents, for as far as the eye can see. And who's in those tents? Comedy fans, that's who. People who've come from far and wide to camp out near the Needle, because they heard a hometown clown was coming back to yuck it up from the top of everyone's favorite retro-futurist tourist tower. I guess you could say that my fan base is kinda like my razor-sharp wit. It's intense. Get it? All the reporters and photographers and caterers and city officials are in hysterics, slapping each other's backs and wiping tears from their eyes. And those people camped out down there, eager to see some live comedy, have twice as much gumption as anyone I knew back when I was young, and everyone acted like this town was the center of the universe. I remember it like it was yesterday. The journos all lean in, eager for some reminiscing about my youth here in Suicide City. Hey, Darberius.
Yes?
I'm gonna dip into some local lingo from the grime rock scene of the early 90s in order to connect with my audience here, okay? And if you break in every time you hear something that's not in your Futurling database, we're gonna be here a while. So use the beeper if you have to, but other than that, please stay out of it. Capiche?
Gotcha, if you say so, Mitch.
Alright. It was a simpler time, before the burdens of extreme wealth and fame, when I was just another young cobnobbler swinging on the flippity-flop with the Av-Rats on Pill Hill. I'd pre-funk with the other grime scenesters at the neighborhood bar, the Rocket, drinking a pitcher of Rainier while looking through the listings in the local music rag, the Comet, trying to decide which clam bake to hit up next. And then it was off to the on-ramp, or the Alligator Lounge, to purify ourselves in the fuzzback-drenched sounds of Catbutt, or the Farce, or lesser-known acts like the Limp Richards or the Shemps. It was a time for hand-rolled cigarettes and cheap beer and raucous pogo dancing in the pogo pit. But above all, it was a time of slacking, because that's what we were, slackers. I remember one time my roommate asked me to close the door to my room because it made her uncomfortable to see me slacking off so much. That's how much of a slacker I was. Anyway, That's enough of the rhapsodical waxing. I'm trying to live my life in the present now, which is harder than you might realize. So, anyone got a question about comedy? Some hack from the Weekly asks me if Chappelle was kicked off the tour because of his repeated use of the M word, specifically his viral onstage tirade when he said, quote, "I know a when I see one," unquote. I take a breath before I answer. First of all, you got to understand that as far as I'm concerned, Dave Chappelle isn't just a comedy legend or a free speech warrior. To me, he's Grandmaster Chappelle, the co-founder of Comedo Defendu, which for me is more than just a slap-fighting technique. It's a spiritual philosophy, and as a humble apprentice, I would never speak ill of the Grandmaster. Having said that, we all have a different idea of where the line is. But I would personally never use the M-word when there are thesauruses full of better alternatives, like people of abbreviated stature, or elevationally disadvantaged, for example. Every punchline peddler I know has a couple dozen of these ready to go, and everyone knows they're just harmless, timeless nuggets of comedy gold. Just ask anyone from the compressed community, and I'm sure they'd agree. What I'm not telling the news hounds, at the request of the Department of Homeland Security, is the real reason why Chappelle left the tour. Not the fear of being silenced by the woke mob like he said in a recent hijinks message, but the fear of being physically murdered by the militant revolutionaries known as the Itty Bitty Direct Action Committee. They'd sent him some DMs that he found upsetting. But who wouldn't get upset from a volley of deadly missiles, I guess? They did almost pierce the armor plating on the Jolly Japaloppy. Luckily, I was too busy playing a Martian multi-ball to notice, or I probably would have been shook up too. I guess it was all too much for Chappelle, who hightailed it back to Yellow Springs, where he says there are no crazy m***s out to get him. A puffier version of Art Garfunkel raises his hand. It's Sean Nelson from The Stranger. He says he noticed I used the term Suicide City and wants to know if I'm connected to something called the Suicide City Secret Cinema, an underground theater with a secret back alley entrance and a complicated password system where you could see prohibited or underground. Never heard of it, I interrupt him, wanting to cut this off right away. The nickname must be a case of parallelogram thinking. See, some people, when they think about Seattle, the first thing they might think about are the great coffeerias, or the excitement of the annual ferry races. But the first thing that comes to my mind are the spectacular acts of self-destruction, like State Rep Marion Zionchek taking a swan dive through a plate glass window from the top of the Smith Tower, or grime rock poet laureate Stephen Jesse Bernstein stabbing himself in the throat with a butter knife on Puget Sound, or ground service agent Richard Russell doing loop-de-loops before plunging to a fiery death in a 747 he'd hijacked from SeaTac. Well, are you sure you weren't connected to the secret cinema? Because the guy that ran the place called himself Claw and looked a lot like your handlebar mustachioed doppelganger. Based on these questions, it sounds like you're not very good at keeping secrets, reporter. Who's next? A hand comes up from the back. It's Seattle Times food editor Bethany Jean Clement. She says she noticed in the big interview/photo spread I did with Pizza Aficionado magazine, I never mentioned the pizza in Toronto, despite having lived there. And since it's got something of a reputation, would I like to go on the record about it now? My stomach clenches. My jaw constricts. If there's any topic I'd rather not get into, it's this one. You say you want to know about the pizza in Toronto? There must be some kind of mistake. I thought you were a food writer. But seriously, a lot has been said about the pizza in Toronto. Some call it inedible, while others argue that it's merely unfit for human consumption. But I don't believe in smearing a whole grease wheel scene based on a few lousy slices, and I wouldn't want to besmirch the people of Toronto, or Tronarians as they call themselves, for their lack of taste or ability to produce pizza that isn't lousy, because frankly, I think they've suffered enough already. But I can tell you this, I tried hard, for a long time, to convince myself that I really liked, or maybe even loved, the pizza in Toronto. I really did. But turns out it just wasn't for me. And that's fine, because apparently I wasn't for the pizza in Toronto either, and once I accepted that, it was like a huge burden was lifted. What can I say? I was a mere lad in my mid-30s, still spinning in the vortex of self-destructive ideation I'd cultivated here. Years before I found my comedic voice, before I'd reached maximum self-actualization. I was unable to express my feelings, except maybe through some elaborate, tortured metaphor. So, officially and on the record, I want to say I've got nothing bad to say about the pizza in Toronto, and I wish it all the best. I'm being as sincere as I can be, but on account of my supernatural timing, everyone at the press conference is laughing their heads off anyway. Most of them are just lolling, although some of them are ruffling, to the point where you gotta keep an eye on the ground to make sure you're not wiped out by a hysterical ruffler. Some reporter from the Times tells me they've been doing some digging and found that before I started performing as Mitch Maloney, back when I lived and worked here, I was involved in a series of projects that seemed to have been abandoned before completion, not to mention receiving a generous grant from the Weiss Foundation that appears to have gone unused. He asks what I would say to the dozens of people that volunteered their time, years in many cases, to help me accomplish my artistic vision, and have nothing to show for it. Look, I tell him, I never officially abandoned any of those projects. They're just currently on pause. The film stock is safe and the hard drives are backed up, I think. I needed to explore other modes of expression that were more about me directly. I just needed to carpe carp, which is grime speak for seize the carp, which we used to say back in the day when we headed down to Green Lake for some old school hand fishing. So for now, I'm doing the stand-up thing. As the arguably talented Ali Wong once put it, to succeed in a creative profession, you really need to love it. And if you love it, and are great at it, and passionate about constantly becoming better at it, you will find success no matter what.
Endnote 1.
At this point in my career, it's important that I don't look back on these temporarily unfinished projects, no matter how many disappointed or confused former collaborators there are. I say to them loud and clear, I'll get to it eventually. Just as soon as I'm the biggest FC in the history of show business, and since I haven't mentioned it for a few chapters, FC is show business talk for a famous comedian. As soon as I'm the most FFC that ever did SU, of them all, I'll circle back to stitch up those old loose threads, unlike those wax slacks we used to wear back in the day. Remember those? The ripped jeans we all wore during the grime rock scene? Another clickbait chaser, this one from the PI, doesn't even wait to be called on. Can you comment on recent delays to your touring schedule? When you first emerged on the scene, you would perform regularly, and now it seems you might go weeks between performances. Is it possible that, like those other projects, your comedy career might be sputtering to a stop? There's a few more chapters to go in the Mitch Maloney story, believe me. I mean, it's got unstoppable right there in the title. You think that's an accident? It doesn't say on a frequent or consistent basis, just unstoppable. Well, how would you respond to critics that suggest that stretching out the tour is a way of delaying an inevitable return to personal responsibilities, such as cleaning out the old frames in the basement of the Velveteria so you can help your life partner attain her dream of moving to a nicer part of LA? Well, that's very personal and disturbingly specific. I didn't expect to be ambushed with gotcha questions by the sleaze merchants of the lame stain media here in my old stomping ground. Look, you know what they say about Sharknadoes, right? How they never stop moving? Well, I'm like that. I have to keep spinning around to the next thing. That's my nature. My creative energy is like the centrifugal force in the middle of a Sharknado. If it stops spinning, it turns into just another boring old pile of sharks. Think about it. Would a Sharknado clean out the basement? Okay, maybe it would, but probably not in a way that's helpful. So what's next for Mitch Maloney? Finally, a question that isn't about the past. Well, I'm glad you asked that. I'm honored to announce today that I'll be co-starring with Alec Baldwin, Scarlett Johansson, and Gina Carano in Misty Midtown Memories, produced by Daily Wire Pictures and written and directed by the most respected auteur in the history of American cinema, not to mention one of the greatest stand-ups of all time, Woody. But before I can finish, some yapper belts out, "Aren't you concerned about your reputation being marred?" I cut them off. Look, just because my personal friend and professional peer with equal billing Scarlett Johansson recently said a few off-the-cuff and out-of-context remarks about the visually impaired and how they're probably just faking it because her eyes work just fine. Hey, that's her opinion, okay? I know it sounds callous to the legacy media, but maybe she's got a point. My eyes work just fine too, so who am I to say? It's impossible to know for sure. Actually, I was wondering about Alan himself. You must have heard that he's been cancelled. Look, I've heard some ugly rumors floating around, which is why I read his fantastic autobiography, in which he explains once and for all how he's been the victim of Mia Farrow's diabolical machinations.
Endnote 2.
How many of you have read Apropos of Nothing? I look around the observation deck hopefully, but not one hand goes up. And you call yourselves journalists. I smell a delicious, familiar smell. I guess the catering has arrived. In accordance with local tradition, I requested the Tourism Commission provide the event with dozens of bags of dicks. It is in the blood of my people to love eating dicks. We love the greasy limpness of the fries, the pillowy softness of the buns, the smell, and above all, the taste of dicks. For the first time in the press conference, no one is laughing. We're so busy enjoying our delicious bags of dicks. Just as I had planned, now I've got the press eating out of my hand. Only better, 'cause they're not eating just anything out of my hand. They're eating dicks. They like me so much at this moment, I could probably misgender Dan Savage in front of the Fifth Avenue Theater while holding an umbrella, and they wouldn't even bat an Ichiro bobblehead about it. A familiar face steps forward. Nancy Guppy. She's got a show called Art Zone now, but I remember her as the face of the Linwood Beauty Academy. She says she's surprised to see me publicly eating dicks when there are rumors that I might become the new mascot for a major fast food chain. I can't officially confirm these crazy rumors, but as far as becoming the iconic Duke of Dunceburger, well, those are some pretty big kickers to fill. But it would be an incredible honor and opportunity to make tremendous amounts of money. A look of confusion crosses the room. But isn't that the epitome, asks Nancy, of selling out? Everyone gasps. Look, this might be hard for some of you to grasp. I know the unwritten rule of Suicide City is that selling out is the harshest of realms, and anyone who does so is a certified cobnobbler. I had that embedded in my brain too, since at least 1989. Struggling in obscurity is the only path. Creating something should be its own reward, with absolutely no thought or effort directed at finding an audience or making money. But what I've come to understand since leaving here is that selling out is actually a pretty good deal. Take pretty much everybody I met in Toronto. You might think Canadian City equals socialist slacker paradise, right? Wrong. Unabashed capitalists, all of them, with subpar pizza. And also they've got a song and dance man there named Drake who, despite the fact that his music's worse than the pizza, people listen to unironically and somehow consider it to be rap music. I look over and see Mayor Mix-a-Lot shaking his head and rattling his thick gold rope in disgust. I got a little off track there. The important thing is that everyone there is part of the rat race, and they don't even think of it as selling out. They think of it as having a career. And it isn't just Toronto. I've traveled all over this continent, a few places in Asia, and most of the white people parts of Europe. And I've come back here to tell you that most people, in most places, openly desire material success and are willing to actively work to get it. Everyone's shaking their heads, not wanting to hear my words of truth. Come on, everyone. Especially you, Knut. It's been 33 years since the release of It Smells Like Jeremy Is Sick. Don't you think it's time to leave our youthful grime rock ideals behind? Maybe it's time for the people of Suicide City to realize that maybe it's okay for one of our own to become a wealthy entrepreneur for a change. I think we've got time for just one more question. Some true crime podcaster named Amanda Knox asks me if it's true that while I was in the UK, I uncovered the real identity of Jack the Ripper. Believe me, I wish I could comment, Miss Knox, but for very mysterious reasons, I'm afraid I can't. The truth is that the 3 surviving Monty Pythons invited me to their fog-shrouded castle in Devonshire for a traditional English supper of bangers and mash and figgy pudding, and begged me to keep my mouth shut, since references to Lewis Carroll are so common and so fundamental to the arts and literature of Western culture, that to reveal to the world what Phoebe Bridgerton Wallers and I had uncovered in Chapter 7 would constitute a crime against the canon, and a blow to the bedrock of humorosity itself. Just then I glance over by the elevator and see my agent Gabby pull a pocket watch from her elegant white faux rabbit fur coat and tap on it while giving me the eye. This is the secret code of the big-time showbiz agent. And just like a major league umpire getting the signal from a pitcher to throw a strikeout, I'm seasoned enough to understand that Gabby's giving me the signal that we're running late. Looks like it's time to wrap this up, I tell the crowd. But first, I'd like to thank Mayor Mix-a-Lot for awarding me the official City of Seattle Seal of Swassness. And I'd also like to thank the mayor for waiving the health and safety regulations restricting the amount of flagrantly oversized high-decibel speakers that can be placed on top of a historic landmark. Lastly, I'd like to dedicate this performance to the one celebrity I waited on when I worked up here in the old sit and spin, as we used to call it, that I ever gave a damn about. Chris Wheaties, a.k.a. Julius Pierpont Patches, the mayor of the dump himself. And as a proud lifelong Patches pal, and lifetime Lefevre believer to boot, I can tell you that the spirit of Pugitopolis is alive and well. So you can go suck a gooey duck, Dory. Everyone cheers as I head towards the hatch. The security goons try to put a safety line on me before I go out, but I tell 'em no thanks, fellas. If today's the day, well, falling off the needle while the city I love has a good chuckle isn't the worst way to go. Reminds me of a bit I heard once in LA years ago by a comic named Durian about how he felt the same way about lunch as he did about death. I'm not hungry, but I could eat, he said. I don't want to die, but I could die.
Endnote 3.
That pretty much sums up my whole MO too. Only for most of my life it was more of a self-destructive but too lazy to do anything about it on account of my grime rock attitude thing. But now it's more like I could die because I knew I'd really left a mark. And not just the gory splat next to the fun forest either. Like Zionchek or Bernstein or Russell before me, people would remember the story of Mitch Maloney. At least 10 chapters worth anyways. I won't bother to get into the details about what happens next, since Jack and Dino is plugged into the soundboard for Sub Pop's forthcoming, all-time best-selling spoken word album, and Errol Morris and his crew are circling around in a helicopter, about to shoot the whole thing for his Oscar-winning short film, Rarefied Mirth. So you'll have plenty of opportunity to check it out for yourself. You know, that line about lunch and death is so spot on for this moment. I think maybe I'll work it into the set. Right after the dirty haikus, but before the cheesy pleaser harmonica gag. Of course, lifting another fella's bit is considered a real cob-nobbler move, and pretty much the top of the no-no list for an FC like me. But maybe I can switch it up a little, make it my own. And besides, I don't think anyone knows about this Durian guy anyway. The last I heard, he was doing a podcast about his life, so basically, he doesn't exist.
This audio edition of Unstoppable Farce, the Mitch Maloney story, was made possible by the Seventh Reformed Church of Latter-day Witnesses, the Bleepers.